speaker today. So Professor Suisheng Zhao is professor and director of the Center for China-U.S. Cooperation at the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies at the University of Denver. He's a founding editor of the journal Contemporary China and is a member of the Board of Governors of the U.S. Committee of the Council for Security Cooperation in Asia-Pacific, a member of the National Committee of U.S.-China Relations, a research associate at the Fairbanks Center for East Asia Research at Harvard University, and an honorary Jianzhi professor at Beijing University, Renmin University, China University of International Relations at Fudan Daxue, and Shanghai Foreign Studies University. He was also associate professor of political science and international studies at Washington College in Maryland, associate professor in government and East Asian politics at Colby College in Maine, and visiting assistant professor at the Graduate School of International Relations and Pacific Studies at the University of California, San Diego. He received his PhD in political science from the University of California, San Diego, and as you can see, he's been busy ever since. He is the author of many books, including a few, China and East Asia Relations, Economic and Security Cooperation, and the Institution Building, which is Routledge 2012, In Search of China's Development Model Beyond the Beijing Consensus, Routledge 2011, and again, 8 more. His articles have appeared in Political Science Quarterly, Wilson Quarterly, Washington Quarterly, International Politic, and many more as well. In other words, we have with us today someone who can speak deeply to the issue and present us with many, I think, intriguing and important concepts around China influence. So please welcome our guest today, Professor Zhang.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the introduction, and for Professor Kong for the invitation to this workshop or annual conference. It's beautiful weather here, and in Denver we're still very cold. And Professor Gong asked me to talk my new book, which you can see from the screen, The Dragon Roars Back, Transformational Leaders and Dynamics of Chinese Foreign Policy. It was published last year by Stanford University Press. When you give a book talk, the question people ask you first is why you wrote that book. In my answer to this question are two aspects. One is empirical, the other is theoretical. Empirically, I'm teaching a course on the making of Chinese foreign and security policy for many, many years, but I have not identified a single volume that would cover all the aspects and over 70 plus years of PRC history. Most books I used are I call unidimensional and statics, meaning that they focused on bilateral relationships between China and certain areas, countries, on certain issue areas during a certain period. So I try to provide a single volume that would cover all 70 plus years of the PRC history and try to integrate all those issue areas and bilateral relationships into one framework. So that's the book. If you teach Chinese politics, please use it, or Chinese foreign policy. And this theoretically, in last several decades, during China's rise, two theories has been used most often to explain China's foreign policy behavior. One is the structure realist theory, which focuses on the so-called relative power, arguing that when China's relative power increases, its power ambition expands, it would inevitably here to redefine its national interests expansively and challenge the U.S. dominance in the international stage and try to redefine its relationships with neighboring countries. In fact, the workshop here, we're talking about influence. That's what the people talk about, the China's economic power or military power increases, it would influence other countries. And this theory could help us to understand China's foreign policy behavior, especially in the last decade when China is rising, getting more expensive. But if we extend this to the whole 70+ years of the PRC history, you find problems. When China's relative power was very constrained during Mao Zedong's years, China was very, very expensive. And China was very confrontational. In fact, Mao Zedong launched, in my book, 6 border wars against not only neighboring countries, but also against the most powerful nation on the earth, the US, and the Soviet Union, India. And Deng Xiaoping moderated Chinese foreign policy. But China's relative power did not change that much. Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao continued Deng's moderate foreign policy, tried to avoid confrontation. But China was recognized as a rising power. During those years, China's relative power increased significantly. Xi Jinping came to office and turned China, abandoned Deng Xiaoping's low-profile foreign policy and became very confrontational against the U.S. or neighboring countries. But China's economic growth in the last decade slowed down. So that's why a lot of people are arguing that China has overreached. When I say overreached, we mean that China set its foreign policy objectives beyond its capacity. So relative capacity here does not match its power ambition. So this theory is not sufficient for us to understand Chinese foreign policy behavior. Another theory has been used very often is so-called regime type theory, which argues that China's foreign policy behavior, especially its aggressive foreign policy behavior, is determined by the regime types. Authoritarian regime would be aggressive. But China's authoritarian regime has not really changed in the last 70+ years. But China's foreign policy has turned up and down in those 70 years. So my theory developed, my book developed what I called leadership-centered framework to argue that leaders here matter. Leaders matter in all political systems, but matter more in PRC's Leninist authoritarian system. In China, the emphasis has been discipline, hierarchy. And the leaders, not like those in the democratic countries, are not relatively unconstrained by oppositional parties, public opinions, term limits, or whatever. So they have almost unconstrained power to make foreign policy or make changes in foreign policy directions. But in the PRC history, in the last 70+ years, not every PRC leader has used that power or authority to chart new foreign policy directions. The PRC official account says 5 generations of leaders led by Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, Hu Jintao, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, and now Xi Jinping. They missed 3 leaders here, Hua Guofeng, Zhao Ziyang, and Hu Yaobang. So all these 8 leaders, when I put them together, I found they could be distinguished into 3 types of leaders. These distinctions make difference in the foreign policy making process or foreign policy directions. One type is so-called transformational leader. We all know the definition. And these people have new visions. They have political wisdoms to navigate in the PRC political power jungle and to mobilize resources domestically and internationally to make their visions prevail. Who are those transformational leaders? Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, and Xi Jinping. These three leaders. And in PRC official terms, Mao Zedong made China stand up. And Deng Xiaoping made China rich. And Xi Jinping is going to make China strong. In my own term, each has charted new direction for Chinese foreign policy. Mao Zedong had so-called revolutionary foreign policy. Deng Xiaoping had developmental foreign policy. And Xi Jinping now has a big power foreign policy. The second type of leaders is so-called transactional leaders. These people, they managed in the PRC context the power jungle, power struggle, and the state in power. But they followed the course set by their predecessors. Who are transactional leaders? Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin. They each stayed 2 terms, 10 years in power, but followed the course set by Deng Xiaoping. The third type is what I called failed leaders. These people may have new visions, but who cares? You lost power. Who are those leaders? The 3 missed in the PRC official history. Hua Guofeng, Hu Yaobang, and Zhao Ziyang. My book, this is the framework I developed in the book. My book focuses on the transformational leaders, the 3 leaders, to see how they develop their new visions and how they establish their power authorities, either by personal or institutional power, and how they mobilize domestic resources. Here I'm talking about create ideational environment, restructure or structure policy-making institutional environment. And in this part, I talk about historical memories and nationalist inspirations, and also how they mobilize international resources. Here we are talking about how they strategically exploit international distribution of power and institutions, norms, regimes, those kind of international variables. I will not talk about the book. I stop here about the book. Because if I talk too much, you will not buy it. So I will focus today, talk about Xi Jinping's, which is a part of the book, of course. Talk about Xi Jinping's power centralization and its implications for the foreign policy direction of China. Before I talk about Xi Jinping, let me first mention that China's foreign policy making hierarchy and the leadership styles. This is very clear. There are 3 layers below the paramount leaders. Paramount leaders always centralized, controlled a lot of resources and a lot of power, especially foreign policy making resources. But they have to use the 3 layers of bureaucratic hierarchy. One is what I call decision-making institutions, the Central Committee of Communist Party, which does not meet every day, only once a year. Then they use Politburo Standing Committee to make decisions, including foreign policy decisions. And the second layer I call policy coordination institutions. These are opaque organizations functioning very often behind the scenes to assist those paramount leaders to coordinate different stakeholders, players, and to make foreign policy recommendations, sometimes even make decisions for the top leaders. Then we see is the line bureaucracy in the party, government, and the military. Each leader has a different style, leadership style, to work with this policy hierarchy. Mao Zedong was the founder of the PRC, had charismatic authority, and also strategist, or what I call crusader. He made strategic and security decisions top down. He hated bureaucracy. He did not want to deal with bureaucracy. So he delegated his trusted lieutenant, premier, Zhou Enlai, to work with bureaucracy. In fact, Zhou Enlai was not only premier, he was also concurrently foreign minister. And Deng Xiaoping, he was a pragmatic, strong leader, and also known as a consensus builder. And he never held top positions in a party government and military. Maybe military, he was a chairman of the military commission. And he placed his proteges in the forefront, premier and party general secretary. He pulled string from behind. And he was a consensus builder because he delegated those authorities to those front runners, office holders. And also he delegated those routine decisions to the bureaucrats. His style is a consensus, a delegation by consensus, meaning that he automatically ratify decisions if those bureaucrats or those office holders can reach consensus. Only step in if they could not reach consensus. That was his style. And his successors, Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin, continued consensus building process under so-called collective leadership, proposed by Deng Xiaoping but never exercised by Deng Xiaoping. And Xi Jinping now has become an absolute spirit leader in PRC history, arguably the most powerful leader in PRC history, because you can all know since the 20th Party Congress has filled all those positions with his personal loyalists, eliminated all the rivals. And he is arguably, maybe it is now, the most powerful leader, and upset, in that case, a long-standing power balance at the top echelon of the leadership. Mao Zedong was balanced by Liu Shaoqi, by Deng Xiaoping and his comrades, wartime comrades. Deng Xiaoping was balanced by those elders, including Chen Yun and all others. And Jiang Zemin was balanced by Deng Xiaoping. Hu Jintao was balanced by Jiang Zemin. Who is balancing Xi Jinping today? I cannot identify anyone. So Xi Jinping has changed the Chinese policy-making process from a consensus-building process to a Xi in command model. I still remember when I came to the U.S. UCSD to study with Susan Shirk, we all say, Mao in command. Now, Xi Jinping is in command model, and he makes decisions top-down. He called top-level design. He even has become a micro-manager. He involves everything. I don't know how can he sleep at this point. Even toilet, where should have a public toilet? He would get involved if he's interested. So he becomes micro-manager. How Xi Jinping has so quickly consolidated his power. He very politically, very skillfully manipulated 3 triggers to consolidate his power. First trigger was that's maybe too Chinese. Before Xi Jinping's time, during Hu Jintao, Jiang Zemin years, those kind of collective leadership, a lot of elites, remember 10 years ago, a lot of people in Beijing complained about Hu Jintao's weak leadership. The collective leadership was too weak too divisive to make decisive decisions, to curb corruption, to curb those liberal ideas threatening one-party rule. So Xi Jinping came to present himself as a strong leader. He talked about China faced unprecedented challenge that led to the collapse of Soviet Union. So China had to have a strong man, strong leader, to stand up. He was the person. So he consolidated his power with the consent of the political elites at that time. I did not like him at that time, but all my friends said, yeah, this is the right person for China. Second trigger was those high-profile scandals. Came right on time for him. 薄熙来, 周永康, 令计划, name it. All at 2012, at that year. Right for him to launch a wide-sweeping anti-corruption campaign, not only build popularity. Who does not hate corruption? Who does not hate corrupt officials? I'm the person to clean the party and also to purge his political rivals, to consolidate power. Third trigger was the rising nationalist aspiration. I'm doing nationalist writing on the nationalist myself. I really see that at that time. The nationalist confidence come together with the nationalist frustration. Those devil Western countries. Remember 2008 China Olympic, Beijing Olympic. A lot of Western countries kind of sanctioned on China. Chinese people said this country did not want to see China to rise to its rightful place. And after that was the Western and the U.S. started the financial crisis. China thought U.S. is in financial trouble, should now accommodate China. But U.S. did not at that time either. So Chinese intellectuals was very frustrated about the Western conspiracy. Xi Jinping came present what? The China dream. The first action he took was went to China's History Museum, Revolution Museum, to present the China dream. If China time comes, I'm the leader to lead China to restore its historical glory. So that's how he consolidated his power. Xi Jinping's power concentration or centralization has been implemented or institutionalized at all the three levels of foreign policy making hierarchy in China. This is the chart. I don't want to see that too messy here. And let me go quickly to the three levels of institutionalization of Xi Jinping's power concentration in the foreign policy making arena. At top level, policy making level, you can see he established personal power and personal loyalty as the norm of interactions, policy making in the Chinese institutions. I list all those. I don't want to repeat that because you must have heard so much about this. Let me move on to the next two levels you may not know that much. One is a policy coordination level. For the foreign policy coordination, for many years, since 1981, there was only one non-standing foreign policy coordination organization called Central Foreign Affairs Leadership Small Group. I said 1981, maybe I should have some clarification. It was created by Mao Zedong in 1957 to cut through bureaucracy because Mao did not like bureaucracy. He built 8 leadership small groups. This is one of them. But it was banned during the Cultural Revolution and restored in 1981 by Deng Xiaoping because China got involved with more domestic players. Deng Xiaoping need kind of coordination. He restored that. Then Jiang Zemin built the second one in 2000. Remember, at that time, 1999, there was embassy bombing incident at that time. We studied Chinese foreign policy at that time. Remember, people talk, oh, China need crisis management coordination, just like the U.S. National Security Council. So the embassy bombing provoked Jiang Zemin to build a separate central small leadership group on national security. Then Hu Jintao built another one 2010. During that time, remember, the maritime security and disputes emerged and intensified. China had 9 dragons playing water. We all take 九龙戏水, all those type of problems. And Hu Jintao built a Central Protecting Maritime Rights and Interests Leadership Small Group. But the problem for those coordination institutions at that time was they lacked the staff support. All those institutions, they relied upon one organization called the Central Foreign Affairs Office, 中央外办, for staff support. In that case, they were functioning only as ad hoc meetings instead of regular institutionalized foreign policy coordination institutions. Xi Jinping came to office, quickly realized the problems. People talked to him about that. He quickly realized he needs some kind of strong coordination of foreign policy. So the first institution he built was the State or National Security Commission. It's not National Security Council. It's National Commission. Very, very high level. Very powerful. He was himself the chairman and the number 2 person premier, or number 2 person in the Politburo as a vice chairman. And this organization was defined not only as a coordination institution, but also policy making and coordination organization. But this organization was established on the Xi new concept of national security, which is holistic national security. When I say holistic national security, it combines both internal security and external security, with emphasis on the internal security, regime security, political security. That's what Xi Jinping has talked about. The external security has been perceived in the frame of connections to internal security. This organization is empowered to deal both. Because Xi Jinping's emphasis on internal security, this organization has, in the years since 2013, moved toward internal security. In that case, 2018, in a reorganization of the China's central bureaucracy, Xi Jinping upgraded the Central Foreign Affairs Leadership Small Group into the Central Foreign Affairs Commission. What's the difference between commission and a small group? Maybe in essence, they are not that much different. But in bureaucratic terms, the commission is more formal, with a more formal bureaucratic ranking, and also with more institutional support. So in that way, he really, in both sides, national security and foreign affairs, enhanced, centralized his power. In the meantime, the Communist Party of China, from Mao Zedong on, they have relied upon very high level central work conference here called Central Foreign Affairs Conference. But these, because of high level, they were not held regularly. Before Xi Jinping, they were held only 3 times. 2013, 4 times. Mao Zedong, Jiang Zemin, and Hu Jintao each held 1. Since Xi Jinping came to office, how many he has have held? He have held 4 times. More than his all predecessors. The most recent one was last December. And in the meantime, he also restructured the meetings of Chinese diplomatic envoys from every 5 years to every year. So the most recent one was also last December. He called back all the ambassadors, all those envoys to Beijing to listen to his instruction, basically to unify the thinking of Chinese diplomats, to focus, to advance his own personal agenda. Very clear, very effective on this situation. And next level is a bureaucratic level. I use 2 terms to characterize what he did. One is politicization. The other is enlargement of foreign policy bureaucracies. Chinese diplomats during Deng Xiaoping's years, or since Deng Xiaoping to Jiang Zemin to Hu Jintao years, they claimed themselves as professionals. Those were recruited from those elite universities with foreign language, international affairs training, and recognized as professionals. But there was a paradoxical transformation of their political status. The more they became professionalized, the less political important they became. The post-foreign minister position, for example, declined from Politburo members, vice premier, state councilor. Morale of foreign ministry, all the diplomats in general was very low. Their salary was not high. They have to be posted overseas many, many years. Kids cannot get good education at home. Lot of problems. Xi Jinping came to office, reversed the political status decline of Chinese diplomats, give them more resources. By the way, last month I heard they each also raised, the salary was raised $1,000 each. But that's the trend since Xi Jinping came to office. Give them more resources, more authority. For example, in Chinese embassy, used to have a Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of all different ministries. They each have their own bosses back to Beijing. Xi Jinping said the ambassador is in charge, foreign ministry in charge. Give them more resources. The budget for the foreign ministry, foreign affairs has also been increased. However, the price. You are no longer professionals. You are all political lawyers of the party. That's why you see the wolf warriors. They are politically assessed instead of professionally valued. And we all remember these kind of changes. Politicization is complete with enlargement of the foreign policy bureaucracies, the party diplomacy. The party departments of propaganda, international liaison, and the United Front, those departments used to be behind the scenes. Now they are all forefront. That's what when we study influence, also they talk about those kind of influence operation in the US and other countries. Who are conducting those influence operations? Party organizations. They define their function different from the state diplomacy, as they were not focused on daily foreign policy operation. They focused on long-term foreign policy objectives to correct the misperceptions of China operation here. Military diplomacy, military joint security conferences, security dialogues, military exercise has also expanded. And both has been tightly controlled by Xi Jinping. His predecessors, Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, somehow lost control of the military. Now Xi Jinping regained control. In the military diplomacy front, for example, the Ministry of Defense Ministry is just symbolic. The decision-making in the Central Military Commission and the International Exchange Department of Defense Ministry was moved to the Central Military Commission as Central Military Commission International Military Cooperation Department. It's totally under his control. Now, finally, what are the foreign policy implications of Xi Jinping's foreign policy, security policy centralization? Let me mention just a few. There are so many. Let me mention just a few first. Xi Jinping has gotten much, much stronger institutional support to implement his big power foreign policy, to abandon Xi Jinping's low-profile foreign policy, to chart new course for China's role behavior internationally. And this has been, Xi Jinping has proposed so many new concepts, and the shared future for mankind, and new initiatives, global security initiative, global development initiative, global civilization initiative, name it. And BRI, AIB, so many new ideas and initiatives. And with all this institutional support, Xi Jinping became much more confrontational internationally, including confrontation with the United States. Xi Jinping will not comply to U.S. unitary demand unless U.S. would have reciprocated in respecting China's so-called core national interests, which are defined as non-negotiable, cannot compromise. So he has built what I call anti-hegemonic coalition with Russia, Iran, and all those authoritarian, not all, just few countries. And I list all those relationships. Second is that Xi Jinping's politicization of Chinese diplomats has changed incentive structure of Chinese diplomats. As I said earlier, they were professionals, but now they are wolf warriors and wolf political lawyers to win battles. Diplomacy becomes battle. You have to win. Diplomats are supposed to make friends, to make a compromise. They can no longer make a compromise. They have to win those battles. And for me, personally, I found now the Chinese top diplomats are so different people now. Wang Yi, now the foreign minister, remember? 10 years ago, or even 7 years ago, when he was ambassador to Japan, everybody liked him. Everybody liked him because he was professional. Now he's a totally different person, the top wolf warrior. This incentive structure has changed. And third, with all those unchecked power, Xi Jinping has tended and actually has been overreached. There are so many examples overreached. He made more enemies, and he alienated those would-be partners, united those enemies. That's what you can see what is going on in China's foreign policy. And China's international relationships environment in his own term has deteriorated. 风高浪急, all those kind of terms he has used to describe those. So in that case, he thought that's conspiracy, whole world against China. So he elevated security over economic development as top priority. of Chinese foreign policy or whatever policy. And this obsession with security made him more tolerant to the risks of pushback, escalation, and further deteriorated Chinese foreign environment, make him very, very nervous, and also more important, make China much more isolated and much more vulnerable in confrontation with the United States. That's typical overreach. I really like this photo. Like October, I was in Beijing, and there was a Belt Road Global Forum. This was the first one was 2017. So many leaders, heads of states. 2019, a little bit less, but still quite a few. This was last year. This includes those spouses. You can see how China is isolated in the international arena. When I saw this photo right away, this tells us. And also, One Belt One Road itself has become the Chinese 最大的烂尾工程, has been kind of white elephant, making so many problem burden for China. Finally, Xi Jinping, his centralization of power has really changed dynamics of foreign policy making environment of China. Because he's just like Putin. He is making decision in a Bible. Why a bubble? Because nobody is there to tell him he's wrong, to disagree with him at this moment. And anyone disagree with him will be purged, as those terms he used in Chinese terms. And this has put him in a really vicious cycle. He's just like any leader will make a mistake. When he made mistake with that kind of power centralization, will have dire consequences. He became more defensive. Then he made more mistakes, more defensive, just like Mao Zedong after 1957. So he, in that case, would make Chinese foreign policy making and also overall foreign policy more unpredictable, even irrational, and with very dire intended or unintended consequences. Thank you. I'll stop here. Thank you. This conclusion, I just use the Chinese terms to say how the changes are. Here, this is the purpose. Okay, the floor is open. Please.
Hi, Professor Zhao. Thank you very much indeed for this insightful talk. And I'm teaching class on Chinese politics and foreign policy. Definitely, I'm going to
use my book.
and teach it again. So the question is that, so you mentioned that Xi has sort of transformed China's foreign policy in the past 10 or 14 years. So, but I kind of see that the first 5 years of Xi's tenure foreign policy is quite different from the next 5 years. So do you see it's the foreign leader's response to Xi's foreign policy actually shaped his sort of a more aggressive behavior, or just Xi's own sort of mind?
That's a very good question, and also very Chinese question. Because China said Xi Jinping becomes more assertive is because of foreign conspiracies, foreign U.S. containment, all those kind of argument. I would not agree with that argument because Xi Jinping came to office has clear agenda, clear vision for China. China dream was his vision very clearly. Give you some examples. South China Sea. I heard when Hu Jintao was in office, I heard this from very, very hardliner person in Beijing. He told me, when Hu Jintao was in office, quite few advisors asked him to build those artificial islands. He said no. No. Too provocative. They said, oh, Vietnam already did it. No. China could not do it. Too provocative. Not only to those Southeast Asian countries, but also to America. Xi Jinping came to office. Great! I mean, some people told him the same idea. He said, great idea. The second year, 2013, China began build those artificial islands. Seven. Much, much bigger than Vietnam built. Tiny one. Belt Road Initiative. All this started before, all this in the first term. Second term continued. And he thought his third term could do more, but now the international pressures make him a little bit push back, need him to step back now. So external forces are important, but not in the way you described. Any more questions? Yes, from students. Oh, white elephant, yes. So many projects are unproductive. So many projects don't make sense. And not only, when it's people say debt trap diplomacy, it's not debt trap diplomacy at all. It's not China wants to make those receiving countries to have debt. Then they have to take those equities. It's not the case. It's for China. All those debts, they cannot take back. So when the first several years of Belt Road Initiative, every province, every company they wanted to put their projects into the Belt Road Initiative track because they got money. They don't care. They don't care if they can make profit or not. At that time, China had overproductive capacity. They want to shift those. No longer. China is really in financial trouble for this white elephant. At that time, that's Chinese term. They thought the 烂尾工程 is really, you cannot finish. I would say if Xi Jinping is gone, this project is gone. Margaret, you want? Okay.
Thank you. That was fascinating. I wonder. I know it's nearly impossible to know this without public opinion surveys, but I wonder if you have a sense of how people felt about the rather abrupt decision to open up China sort of at the tail end of the COVID-19 pandemic, and just more broadly speaking, how the population feels about Xi. I remember, just as you were saying about Hu Jintao, people would just vote very openly say, oh, he's so weak, he doesn't do anything, and it's very critical, and obviously you don't hear anything like that now, but are there different sentiments that we have to be aware of, especially among different segments of the population?
This is a very good example of making decision in a bubble. I don't think Xi Jinping had the information, the truth about the pandemic, about the lockdown, zero COVID policy. Nobody told him. Nobody dares to tell him. He still believed in so-called 生命至上, 人民至上, the lives as top priority. People are the top priority. He still believed in what he said because everybody fit in him that way. When did he know? The European Commissioner came to China. That was the white paper movement started late November. At that point, he got some information about people's unhappiness. The young people, students, went to the streets. Not only a few, but widespread, so many cities. I think that was the first time I heard that, because when the European Commissioner President went to China, the Chinese media, for the first time, they reported Xi Jinping's conversation with him. Oh, I heard some young students are not happy. In the Chinese news, first time. Then, a few days after, U-turn. The U-turn. Without any process. Without any process. Just, oh yeah, some people are unhappy. He will not say he was wrong. Oh, wow, I heard now we have to do this. He did that. That's how his power was. That's so dangerous for China. And he's making a lot of mistakes. Okay, Evan.
Actually, a comment about the white elephant and a question.
Yeah.
The concept of
Evan is my colleague at Denver and expert on the Chinese Belt Road.
I also know about the white elephant. It comes from like this really expensive elephants in Thailand that are very expensive to maintain, and it's a gift to royalty. So when that became a modern concept to talk about big projects that are really expensive to maintain, even if they don't do anything. Sorry, just
That's a much better answer than I do.
No,
I'm so proud of, see, I have good colleague.
It's a good trivia, especially when people talk about elephants. So I do have a question, and this is often asked in DC. So you do have this, like, as you know, I think this is a magnificent book, and you do talk about sort of like this, like, foreign policy by Xi Jinping. Right now, the United States is reacting in a way that is provocative. They're building bases in the Philippines, expanding military agreements in Southeast Asia, expanding armaments and export agreements as well. What is the most likely reaction of China to a lot of this, like a lot of this activities by the United States in the South China Sea?
This is an interaction issue. From U.S. perspective, I think U.S. has tried to use whatever ways or whatever means it could become available to confront China. In fact, I would even argue further that U.S. has overreacted to the China threat. When I say overreacted, meaning that exaggerated China's threat. Just China side overreach. When China overreach, U.S. overreact. And the Philippines and the South China Sea, that makes things very, very tense and dangerous. Of course, China side try to buy the Philippines for default markers, but they were successful. But that's what the people argue with Chinese leaders. When you try to buy influence, you can only buy certain people. When there's a regime change or there's government change, that will not work. That's a very good example how the influence cannot be really bought. You have to have a shared interest to maintain that influence. And I think China side is very angry on this. Not only angry, China has that mentality. They see big powers, middle powers, and small countries. As you are aware of that, they always thought the Philippines is a small country. Remember 2012, the stalemate in stock growth. Yeah, so when the Philippines withdraw China state, and the Philippines threatened, then Luo Yuan, those kind of military officers and people, they all wrote those articles. I cited those articles in my own research, that we are ready to fight war. Philippines, just like Vietnamese. Deng Xiaoping had those concepts. Teach them a lesson. Just like I'm the father, big father. You are just kids. You did not respect me. And so I will teach you a nation. That's the mentality they have. Still, for them, the Philippines issue, if there's no America, it will be different. What they are concerned is America, just like Taiwan, in a very similar situation. Now U.S. has been so firm on this issue. China, even though they are angry, they want to take some kind of punitive actions, but they try to set a limit there. That's what I think, what China is responding at this time. That student? Okay. Mm-hmm.
What do you think the implications are of the U.S. increasing military presence in the Philippines as of late? Like, what do you think the Chinese response in the long term will be for this?
I don't know long term. For China so far, they have this naval capacity in South China Sea. China's actions has been very much shaped by their perceptions of the power balance in the area. For many years, China's policy toward South China Sea disputes was 搁置争议, to put aside of the disputes. Let's have a joint development. That was their position, because at that time their navy was very, very limited. They have the coast defense, then near sea defense, then far ocean defense. Now they reached the stage of far ocean defense. And so militarily, they thought, at least for now, they could confront or could control the situation. And just don't trigger the Philippines U.S. defense, mutual defense security treaty. That's what China is not ready to confront U.S. Militarily in the South China Sea. But if only Philippines, they don't think that's an issue for them at this time. That's why they were so proactive, using that water cannon and laser, all those things. So aggressive. I just thought, why? It does not make sense. But they did that. Okay, Professor Kong.
Thank you so much again for centering the role of leaders in the analysis of China's foreign policy. And for many that study foreign policy, particularly from a political science point of view, we all lament over the fact that leadership is not often very prominent in this discussion. Having said that, I think it's also important to recognize that leaders operate under structures, and these structures also create constraint for the leaders, even for transformative leaders like Mao and Xi Jinping during the 60s. Mao, domestic problems, domestic policy failures, and foreign policy problems compelled Mao Zedong to work with the United States. Hence, we had the Nixon's opening, etc. Right? And the reason I'm going back to the history is to really link it to where we are. And obviously, you've recounted the policy errors China has made under Xi Jinping, and now that China is faced with a very different environment, domestically, economic, the economy has been tanking, problems are abundant, and externally, China is a bit isolated, right? And in light of this reality, we start to see some adjustment. And my question for you is whether you think this adjustment is tactical, or this is a reflection of this adaptation, this fundamental constraint of the policy, the mistake China has made under Xi Jinping. We see that in the case of charm offensive toward Australia, the November summit, 2023 November summit between Xi Jinping and Biden, right? We start to see some of these adjustments that start to sort of suggest or portend some stability in China's big power relations. But to what extent is this a short-term, a tactical move, or are you still convinced that the fundamental impulses and the impulses released by this concentration of power actually will push China in a direction that may not be necessarily pleasant for China or for the rest of the world?
There are two questions here. First of all, you talk about the international environment change could be as important as a leader's role. Leaders are constrained by those balance power. That's right, but my argument here is that those international environment change or balance power change does not matter until the leaders perceives those changes and take actions in response to those changes. The Soviet relationship began to change in late 1950s, deteriorated so much in 1960s. Mao Zedong did not take any action toward the U.S. until 1970s. Because he thought something changed. He asked, he thought Cultural Revolution was somehow pacified, at least the mass mobilization stage was over, and he turned to international affairs. He asked 5 marshals, Ye Jianying, Chen Yi, those 5 marshals, to do a study of China's relationships with Russia, the Soviet Union, and the U.S. And these old marshals, especially Chen Yi, he played a very important role to say now the Soviet Union was more threatening than the United States, and we should work with the United States. He even he wrote 2 reports, and 1 personal note to Mao Zedong. He said we should restore the ambassador level contact with the United States to start the process. So when they realized this change, then the international environment became matter. Otherwise, Mao Zedong did not care. It's just like preoccupied Cultural Revolution, all those domestic issues, 反帝反修, all international reactionaries, U.S., the Soviet Union, everyone was China's enemy. Only North Korea, maybe North Korea not quite, Albania was China's friend. I still remember. I'm old enough to remember all those old-timers. And but even that, I will still argue that Mao Zedong's adjustment was more tactic than, as you asked, second question, fundamental. Because this was a so-called united front tactic. International united front tactic. I'm writing an article now to study China international united front. United front is defined with as that you ally with partners that share your limited, restricted objectives. But they are fundamentally different. So Mao used the United States against the Soviet Union. Now used Russia against the United States. All the united front tactic for restricted, limited objective. They eventually, all the united front ended with fighting. Domestically, internationally, with KMT's 2 united front, with the Soviet Union, now with the United States against the Soviet Union, international anti-Soviet, Soviet united front, now international anti-hegemonic united front, all the same thing. And when you say in last several months, China has sometimes softened its tone because of information. Xi Jinping got some real information. China's economy is in trouble. And the U.S. is not, as he thought, doomed as those people. Yeah, he still think America is declining. 东升西降, the profound change unseen in a century. He insists that when he talked to Putin in last March, he said, the scene change. He still believes in that. He still believes that. So he would still work very hard to restore China's global dominance if he could. But now he met barriers, domestic problems, international problems. He adjusted his tactics. That's what I will argue about. Oh, Margaret, you have...
No other students. Just one more. I think this concept of a big country, big power, Daguo, right, is so interesting. And I see it, I mean, in the Latin American context, at least, as driving so much of what's happening, right? This notion of, you know, a Daguo has deep space exploration capacity. So, therefore, we will develop, you know, a space base in Argentina, or, you know, long-range naval capacity, right, is something else that big countries have. They influence standards in international organizations. They do these things, right? There are things that big countries do, and therefore China ought to do those, right? And so I'm wondering to what extent, I mean, this certainly has been a feature of Xi Jinping's, you know, thinking and, or, you know, the party's broader thinking and foreign policy, but is it still driving this notion of a big country?
That's yeah.
It's still driving, and then is there anything more that we should expect, you know, in terms of what big countries do that China might be pursuing, feels it's not yet accomplished, and might be pursuing more extensively looking ahead?
China would eventually build a hierarchical international order. The big countries are at the top, like China. Maybe for a while they think they talk about 两超多强, two superpowers, U.S. and China. Although China is still there, but a lot of big powers. So that's the hierarchical relationship of international order. If China's economy restores, they will still want to dominate international order. In fact, a couple months ago, 重阳金融研究院 Renmin University, they published a report. They contacted me, say if I can join them. And they have a lot of this kind of, they call it 2035畅想, the wishful thinking, I'll put that way, for China 2035. They have a lot of indicators, economic, GDP, everything. One of them is, by that time, China will overtake the United States economically. I ask them, first of all, is that your objective? I mean, for your own future, why you want to take America? And the second, is that realistic? But that's their thinking. They shape their thinking, compete with the United States. Eventually overtake U.S. So China said they will never want to be a superpower. They never want to overtake the United States. You believe that? I mean, both sides. That's why I argue that overreaction argument that all these talks, meetings, visits, Secretary of State, Treasury Secretary, and summit in San Francisco, it does not matter. I don't think they matter that much. The problem between China and the U.S. is not they misunderstand each other. It's not they misjudge each other. It's not misperceive each other. The over 50 years of interaction have made them understand each other too well to make compromise. They know your the lines, the red lines. Both sides, America to China, will not want to contain China, will not want to stop China's economic growth. Do you think Chinese believe that? Of course not. When Chinese tell Americans, oh, we don't want to take over the United States, so we're still a developing country. Do you think Americans take it? Of course not. So they talk the talk, walk the walk. That's the problem of these two countries. Any more questions? If not, maybe we... Oh, yes.
Yeah, just the question I discussed with my students in my class.
Mm-hmm.
So we have sort of had a thought experiment. So what if Xi is not Xi today, but he sort of continued the Hu and Zhang's sort of low-profile approach in foreign policy? So what would happen?
We don't know because we cannot hypothesize the history, to go back to history. During the second term of Hu Jintao administration, this trend of getting harder internationally already started, but Hu Jintao held on for quite a while. And those hardliners, including those military hawkish people, pushed Hu Jintao very, very hard. And Hu Jintao pushed hard to have a so-called big power diplomacy. But Hu Jintao did not attack that. And I still remember the last year of Wen Jiabao, Hu Wen administration. Wen Jiabao was in Europe, and people asked him about China's ambition in relationship with Europe. He used the term 大国. Then even that term was censored by Chinese media. We're not 大国, we are still developing country at that time. So if Hu Wen's policy continued, China would become much more aggressive, but not to Xi Jinping's level. Because at that time, I still remember there was debate if China should abandon 韬光养晦, the no-profile policy. Wen Jiabao made so clear, China must insist 韬光养晦, because there is a Western conspiracy. They conspired to make us abandon that, then they can head us. Would not. Hu Jintao he was weak, but he was not stupid. And at least on those issues, people said that China should make more contribution, take more international responsibility. And basically, all those his people said that's conspiracy. Then he said China 要量力而行, only take the responsibility in a light of China's capacity, would not be pushed to take those responsibilities. America, you stupid, you can take responsibilities. That's the mentality, and that mentality could continue at least for a while if without Xi Jinping came to office so quickly, abandoned. He came to office, first thing to abandon Xi Jinping, Deng Xiaoping's no profile foreign policy. At that debate, I documented that debate at that time. I really feel strong that the view against abandoning was prevailing at that time. But then, totally changed. Yan Xuetong is a very good example. Yeah, Yan Xuetong, in Tsinghua University, a professor, he already proposed 大国外交. He was a strong advocate of 大国外交 under Xi Jinping's position. I mean, Xi Jinping's watch, not Xi Jinping, Hu Jintao's watch, but Hu Jintao did not take his position. Then Xi Jinping came to office, took his position, but he thought his position was too low. Because Yan Xuetong lost favor. Because he was much more rational. Yes. Please, yeah. I just.
So I'm wanting to actually tag on to Wayne's first question again around where the primary driver is. So you've said overreach and overreaction. So I want to actually agree with your thesis, and I appreciate very much the detailed nature of your presentation. Having said that, I want to create a hypothetical. What if American domestic policy is the driver in a way that hasn't been accounted for in the influence model, which presupposes there's a person who is making choices that is driving world history in the way that we can then study better, understand, and control for better in our own foreign policy. But just to imagine for a moment the narrative around the bifurcation of the U.S. population into left and right echo chambers being attributed to the rise of social media, and that in this space, it turns out that China becomes an interesting third space that can unify the two, and it becomes rhetorically leveraged at every vantage from every political opportunist, who wants to try to find a middle ground. China becomes the rhetorical middle ground that unifies the states. In this hypothesis, you could also look at the transactional period that you've described, with Hu Jintao and the like being reassessed in this moment, to being actually quite predatory toward U.S. Citizens and our capacity for industry, et cetera. And in that reassessment, none of this would kind of account for any of the overreach that is assumed to be causal in the kind of presentation where we think of him being reactive. America's in this reactive space, rather than thinking of a new leader coming in, understanding, reading the tea leaves that this is already taking place, that there's a limit for Western powers to be able to imagine a cultural paradigm so different, so mysterious and opaque, as to trigger all sorts of ethnocentrisms and the like that are drivers, that are also not accounted for in the model of a singular person. So this goes back to the original kind of question whether influence always presupposes and reduces complex systems into personified intent, and that when you have a real strong leader like Xi, it actually leads us even further down that path of reductionism. So how do we as Americans think about how we look at ourselves that might actually influence the outcome of U.S.-China relations?
When do you think U.S. discourse began to change?
I knew you were going to do it, because this goes back to where the
I would say
it's triggered by his policy.
2015, the year before Trump came to office. Mike Lambden gave a talk at Carter Center. He said so strongly about the change of American discourse on China, American unhappiness with so-called engagement at that time. He talked about the tipping point, 2015. That was just 3 years after Xi Jinping came to office. And China Dream, South China Sea, all those things. And at that time, quite a few people were kind of alarmed about that at that time. And but now still got that point until Trump came to office. The whole discourse changed. And China became, as you said, bipartisan target and empire of evil, just like former Soviet Union, to unify the U.S. domestic discourse. And when you talk to Chinese people, they give you just their typical propaganda. That said, just like we have a propaganda, American have a propaganda. American media, American propaganda, they change that dynamics. I said, no, it's not American propaganda. How American could believe their propaganda because China's changed discourse or changed behavior. And so this overreaction, this still is overreaction because at that time, everybody thought China would overtake U.S. In 2015, 2025, 2027, 2030, everybody talked about that at that time. That's exaggeration. China was never in that position. And China is not in a position today either. But China still will continue to develop, but not in that type of exaggerated speed and also threat. And so the U.S. At this time assessment of China's threat is exaggerated. That's what I would argue about. No more questions? You let me go easy. Thank you.